Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
What did you think when you saw the way Boris Johnson was disposed of this week?
Well, it's been quite an extraordinary week with all of the changes that have taken place. I'm supporting Theresa May for the leadership of the Conservative Party to be our next Prime Minister.
So when you saw that happen, when you heard about what happened, when you heard what had happened to Boris Johnson, he was pulling out of the race, what do you think?
Well, Boris has been such a big political figure in the Conservative Party for so long, and I very much hope that he will still have a role to play within Conservative politics.
What did you think when you
Surprise,
that moment
shock.
when he pulled that? Yeah.
I think it was quite extraordinary that Boris, having set up in terms of running for the Conservative leadership, suddenly now not to be running, and how things have changed, how so much has changed.
And now
over
that
the
your
course of last
candidate
week.
could win?
Well, we're not taking anything for granted on that, Tim. It's important that we get out to sell out the message of what Theresa will do, the experience she has, how she would be a leader from day one. But it's important that we underline that sense of unity of the party coming together, the country coming together. I believe that Theresa May has all of those qualities, what is needed, but we will need to see what Conservative MPs will say this week. And so it's now that steady approach in underlining the strengths that Theresa has and how I think that she would be the right person.
Jim Fitzpatrick, the next steps for your party?
Well, the ball is very much in Jeremy Corbyn's court. He's lost over 60 of his shadow ministers, including most of his shadow cabinet. He's lost the support of many of his previous supporters within the Parliamentary Labour Party. There seems to be a groundswell outside, which is not as supportive of him as previously.
But of course, the fortunate thing, of course, is that he is supported by the membership, and that's why he should stay where he is, isn't it?
Well, there is anecdotal evidence that the membership are moving, but whether they're moving enough for him not to win another contest remains to be seen. But the only person who can break the logjam is Jeremy, and he's lost the confidence of the dressing room, if we can use a football analogy. His team won't play for him, so how can he possibly carry on?
But why Barry Gardiner, a fellow London MP who you know well, why he says this has been, an offence against democracy, what you've been doing?
Well, people have to stand on the principles that they think are right. The members of the shadow cabinet and shadow ministers who thought that Jeremy was leading us in the wrong direction, that we couldn't win an election, they've tried for 9 months and ultimately they've said it's just not going to work. And on that basis, they've said we will not be part of it.
Other James, just before we move on, surely the next Prime Minister has to be somebody who voted for Brexit.
No, I think we need to have the right person with the right qualities, and Theresa, I think, has those qualities. She could be Prime Minister from day one.
To win over, let's face it, 17 million people voted for it. The key quality has to have made that decision to lead that battle.
But this is about choosing a Prime Minister. It's not, of course, how we negotiate, how we get the best possible deal for London and for our country is very much at the forefront. But it's also about national security, our place in the world. I think that Theresa May has those qualities to do that. But it's also how she will set up a new separate department led by someone who advocated Brexit, how we can bring that together and I think reunify the country as well.
Making the right decision for London. It's like you've read the script. Let's move on. The Mayor, Sadiq Khan, said this week that Brexit made the case compelling for more powers to be devolved to London. That is, to the Mayor and to the boroughs. He hijacked a Leave slogan and said it was time to take back control. Max McGill has more.
As the petition calling for London to declare independence reached almost 200,000 signatories this week, the Mayor outlined his case for London.
London has to take back control too. Londoners who voted for a different path than the rest of England need more self-determination. We need to control our own destiny, and we need to make our own decisions too.
The Mayor is backing calls to keep all business rate income, stamp duty income and revalue council tax. He also wants to borrow more for infrastructure like transport and also take over suburban railway services. Sadiq Khan has urged the government to move fast on devolution, and he asserts that London cannot afford to hang around for the outcome of EU negotiations.
Well, Gerard Lyons has dropped in to join us too, Chief Economic Advisor, formerly, to Boris Johnson. Welcome to you. And impossible, before we get on to some of the economics and some of the devolution issues, not to talk about the man. What do you feel about what happened to Boris Johnson?
Well, I haven't spoken to Boris since the referendum. As you know, I advise him on economic, financial issues. Obviously, it's disappointing that he's not continued with his campaign. But to be quite honest, policies matter more than personalities. I think Andrea Leadsom is a very good candidate. She brings forward the Brexit case. I was a strong
Rather than
supporter.
Michael Gove?
In my view, definitely, yes. And I supported the Brexit case. Brexit, in my view, is not only positive for London, but positive for the UK. And in terms of candidates, obviously you asked about Boris. He was a very good mayor of London, but we're in a new situation now. And I think Andrea, personally, is a very good candidate for
Any
the PM
comment
role.
about why Boris Johnson pulled out?
No, I don't have any more information on that than you have.
No.
And obviously the press today, and not only today, is full of that. So,
But aren't you
I've been-
disappointed, given you would have backed him and wanted to see him? Obviously, you helped him a lot in terms of the Leave campaign and supplied a lot of the intellectual ballast. Some of the reports you'd written for him. Are you disappointed that he didn't go ahead and stand?
As I say, I advised Boris on economic financial issues, and I played a role in terms of the economic case for Brexit. But yeah, at the end of the day, life's more than personalities. Obviously, I think he would have done very well. But as I say, I think there are other good candidates as well. But coming back to your question, am I disappointed? I think the most important thing here now is that the country has voted for Brexit. Obviously, one needs to be mindful of the fact that 48% of people voted to remain.
Yeah.
But I think we need to actually move forward, leave the European Union. I personally think the best way to help us is to actually invoke Article 50 to make it quite clear that we are not going to try and reverse this decision.
When? Soon, immediately?
Well, I think the challenge is that in the near term, we need to have political stability and clarity about policy. Obviously, we can't have political stability until either the new Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition are fully in place. I would like personally to see that all speeded up, but that's not possible, it seems. But once we have political stability, then we can start to implement sensible policies, not just for London. Obviously, this is a London programme, but this is about the United Kingdom.
The major report you did for Boris Johnson a couple of years ago made clear that obviously the best option would be to stay in the EU as long as it was reformed. And the second best option was obviously that you could come out and then really negotiate very well subsequently.
Okay.
Do you still stick by that?
Well, to be quite clear, in terms of the scenarios, I stress that leaving would be an economic shock, and indeed the Treasury Select Committee referred to my comments in their report. Yeah. And I said if one looked at the scenarios, the best two scenarios by a long way were to either be in a truly reformed European Union or to be global with Brexit. And both of those were considerably better than staying in an unreformed EU.
And you did talk about the shock, and you did put a timescale. You said you expect maybe there to be turbulence for a couple of years. Have you been surprised by the immediate shocks that there have been after the decision?
Well, actually, I didn't say there would be turbulence for a couple of years. What I made clear was that it depends on the policies chosen. And I think, coming back to reiterating an earlier point, we need to have sensible policies being chosen. So life and the economic outlook depends on the interaction between the economic fundamentals, policy and confidence. The fundamentals in the UK showed the economy already losing momentum before this referendum. Also, the G7 countries in Japan 6 weeks ago highlighting the need for the global economy to have another policy boost. The policy side, clearly we need the right policies, and confidence is a difficult one. What's interesting, I think, is that on Friday the Chancellor, correctly in my view, sort of changed his fiscal stance. We need to have a lot more infrastructure spending. The UK government can borrow next to nothing, and we should be investing longer term for the infrastructure, not just for London.
And James, do you agree that actually the signals, I mean, we might get a little bit of short-term turbulence, but actually what was the fuss about? We will restore confidence eventually with the right leader in place and so on, with political stability.
Well, I think that is now the key objective, that we do move forward, and that we've seen.
And it was always going to be the objective.
Well,
really, leave was never going to be that much of a problem.
I think that, from my point of view, I wasn't arguing that the sky would fall in, nor was Theresa May, who I'm supporting, saying that either. It is now giving that sense of confidence and stability, getting the right policies. From my perspective, I think we shouldn't just rush to invoke Article 50. I think it's important that we have a clear approach set out in terms of our negotiating mandate, so that we're able to go in clearly and get the best possible deal. That's why I think it's right not to trigger that, say, before the end of this year. But it is now about how we get that best possible deal for the city, for London, on passporting of financial services, on the best possible access for goods and services to the single market. And that, I think, is the approach that we need to be very clear on.
And Jim Fitzpatrick, no signals at all that London can't get, a good deal in this new world?
Well, Sadiq has outlined this week that London obviously has a special place within the UK economy. It needs special arrangements, and he's already had a meeting with Oliver Litwin. He's already laid out a case for greater devolution of powers to the Mayor of London and to London as an entity. People are naturally very worried, and we need the reassurance of, as Gerald says, political stability, and that's not going to happen very soon, but hopefully as quickly as possible. And to be honest, we need an effective opposition as well to keep the government on their toes, to hold them to account, and we're not going to do that anytime soon with the way that the Labour leadership is acting.
Was there any sense of contradiction for you? I think this is what you were saying this week in Sadiq Khan asking for more powers and more devolution to London, given that you think, his support for the EU was a centralising body, etc.
Yeah, I was on the panel just after the Mayor spoke, and I thought he gave a very good speech, but I thought there was a big contradiction in terms. He was talking about the need to be very much in the EU. And we have to remember, over the last decade, the European Union has become centralising, controlling, regulating. But at the same time, the Mayor said devolve more powers to London.
But
which
isn't
was
that
something
the point, though? Because of the EU decision, it now has made that case even more for the devolution.
Yeah, basically, we have decided to leave the European Union. I think that's in the best long-term interest of London and the whole country, despite the near-term uncertainty. But what the Mayor said this week was something that Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor, was pushing for the last couple of years. And this is sensible, to devolving more powers, not just to London, but across the whole country. Okay. Better for accountability, transparency, and also the Prime Minister and Chancellor allow more infrastructure spending.
Brilliant.
That's a plus.
Let's move on. Stay with us. Just over 1 million EU nationals account for 12% of the capital's population. What's the future hold for them? Raphael Sheridan has this.
Perhaps overlooked amidst the sound and fury of the battles fought over the referendum, the decision to leave the European Union has cast doubt over the future of EU nationals living in the capital. Those nationals seeking clarity might feel less than assured by Theresa May's speech on Thursday as she launched her campaign to become the next Prime Minister, indicating that the legal status of EU nationals will at some point be on the table for negotiation.
And until a new legal agreement is reached with the EU, which will not happen for some time, the legal status of British nationals living or working in Europe will not change, and neither will the status of EU nationals in Britain.
Cause for disquiet then for the EU national community here in the capital. We showed a few of them Theresa May's speech.
Actually, a colleague of mine at work, she came to work the other day and she said her kids came back from school saying that, asking mum that, are we going to be deported? Do we have to leave the country now? What's going to happen? She said, no, don't worry, we're not leaving, but after this statement, who knows?
I feel that the morning after the referendum results, I felt it was a different city. Suddenly I'm looking over my shoulder for no reason, or maybe I do have a reason. It's kind of a primal instinct now to just think about looking at people in the bus and think, oh, is that 50% in this bus voted for me to get out of this bus?
The UK has yet to begin negotiations to leave the EU, leaving the fate of EU nationals here very much in limbo.
Gerald, let's ask you first, kind of briefly, would London survive without its EU workforce?
Well, I think they are going to stay. But in terms of London, 38% of the London economy, or the London population, is international. It's on a par with New York, Singapore, other international financial centres. 1 in 8 people in the finance industry are Europeans from outside the UK. So they are important, and hence the focus on the points-based migration system.
Jim Fitzpatrick, freedom of movement now, that's up for grabs. You have to reconsider your policy on migration as well.
Well, it's clearly an issue, and even Jeremy Corbyn seems to have accepted that. But the attacks on European citizens and on people who are brown or black, which have happened since Brexit, are completely outrageous. And it's great that the government has said they're going to clamp down on that. Yep. We need to see the police taking greater action, because these people have been working here. They're helping London be as successful as it is, and they need those reassurances and those safeguards.
But will EU citizens or European citizens or EU citizens after EU, will they be able to stay here?
Well, there's no change at the moment whilst we remain in the European Union, and it's important that as part of those negotiations we look for guarantees for those EU citizens who are here, those who are working, those who are contributing, and equally for British citizens overseas.
So we will but just to concentrate on the ones that are going to be here, we cannot guarantee. We heard some concerns in the film there, and I didn't hear it clarified by Theresa May on Robert Peston this morning. Can you guarantee that all the people from the EU who are here now will be able to stay here for as long as they like.
I think it's important that we seek those guarantees as part of the negotiation, but Jim's point is absolutely right. The attacks that we've seen, some of the awful incidents that have taken place are utterly unacceptable, don't represent our capital city, don't represent our country.
But you accept you cannot guarantee that, do you? You cannot guarantee the people here that have made their careers, their lives, contributed their taxes and whatever, they won't be able to stay here.
I think it's important that we have this as a core part of the negotiation to get that assurance, because as Gerald has said, it is such an important part of our economy, around 60,000 people in the care sector, 50,000 people in the NHS. We need to look at that assurance so that people can continue to contribute in that way.
You're shaking your head, Jim Fitzpatrick, but no party will be able to guarantee that now.
Well, the difficulty is that the mixed signals that the government are sending with the Brexit vote last week, it's given licence to the racists in the community to think it's a field day on foreign people. We need the assurances. We need to make sure that the government acts to clamp down on people who are attacking those with a different accent or a different
colour. And that is the firm response that the police are giving, the firm message that this government is giving. It is utterly unacceptable.
Running out of time. Sorry, can't come back to you for any more. Gerald, thanks very much indeed for coming. First it was meant to be last autumn, then Christmas, then it was this summer. Now it's slipped until at least October. No one seems to want to have to make this decision on airport expansion. But the chair of the commission which recommended a third runway at Heathrow, and as a second preference another runway at Gatwick, has told us he thinks the new Prime Minister, whoever that is, will come at it with an open mind and in the national interest.
A new campaign to challenge plans for Heathrow Airport gets underway tonight. Tim Donovan has the story.
Just a small airfield in the middle of acres of farmland. This was pre-war Heathrow.
People have been making almost exactly the same news report about Heathrow expansion for decades. There's a map of the new runway, a visit to a potentially blighted village, assurances from airport bosses.
We said we didn't think another runway was necessary in the southeast until the year 2016, providing we're allowed to build Terminal 5.
The latest push for a third runway began exactly 1 year and 2 days ago, when the government's Airport Commission reported. Chaired by the economist Sir Howard Davis, he plumped for Heathrow.
We have concluded that the northwest runway at Heathrow is the best option.
But 12 months on, he told us that he was disappointed with the speed of progress.
I did expect a decision before now. They said they needed to look at our evidence and our analysis, which is quite reasonable, but that they would make a decision in the autumn. That's the autumn of 2015.
The decision came eventually in December and opted for indecision. More work was needed, the government said, on air quality impacts. But then, this week, more delay. The government said it would now be down to the next Prime Minister to make a decision. News which dropped just hours before this meeting from the lobbying group Let Britain Fly.
Now, on every seat here, they've given away a packet of fudge, which says, "Stop fudging a decision on airport expansion." It's fair to say that a lot of people here think that's exactly what the government have just done.
I'm not surprised, but it's bad news for the British economy. Now more than ever, we need decisions to go ahead on investment in infrastructure.
But the news kept coming. After the meeting, this.
I have concluded that person cannot be me.
Along with the former mayor's prime ministerial ambitions, surely went any hope of this. His idea for an airport in the Thames estuary, sometimes dubbed Boris Island.
Now, whether building a new airport in the Thames estuary was a good idea or not, you can't take it away from Boris Johnson. He was certainly very clear in his enthusiasm for the idea. What's much less clear is where the people who are still in the race to be the Conservative leader stand on the issue.
Both Theresa May and Michael Gove have constituencies near Heathrow and have, in the past, expressed concerns about its noise. So, does that mean that they would oppose a third runway?
Neither Theresa May nor Michael Gove were involved in the Cabinet Committee which was looking at these options, and I'm not aware that they have made any firm commitment either for or against. They both have struck me when I've met them as being people who are analytical, who will look at the pros and cons in a way that is imbued with the national interest, if you like, rather than their local interest.
But nevertheless, it seemed to some that it was a good week for alternatives to a Heathrow airport, namely building a second runway at Gatwick.
Yes, a very good week for Gatwick. I mean, in our view, we've always had a very strong case, and we think today our case is probably as strong as it's ever been. So yeah, very good week for us.
The provision of a third airport for London is no problem, according to...
For half a century, people have struggled with how to build extra airport capacity here in the southeast. Could it be that it's so difficult, the closest a new runway ever gets to being built is pretty much just a map drawing on a news report?
James, what will you be advising Theresa May to do if it is she getting to make a decision?
Well, let's just
let's look at
the evidence that will come through. It's important that we get the air quality information that the Secretary of State has said. Equally, the airport operators are saying that they will set up more detail as to how they would provide financial compensation and also the links to other airports as well. And so I think it's about getting this decision right. I can understand why this decision has been deferred. It doesn't affect the long-term timescale, but rather it is better that whomever is the next Prime Minister has that information to their fingertips
where are you
and can make that decision.
Where do you think, personally? Have you expressed a view?
I've not expressed a view. I too want to look at the evidence to see what that says, what that points to, knowing that for so many people the air quality information is really essential to the conclusion on this.
Clarify for us, because Theresa May has raised issues around the noise, but I've always understood that she was against expansion at Heathrow. Do you know if that's the case?
I've never had a conversation with her about this, and so I couldn't say. You'd have to ask her in terms of her views. But it's about looking at the evidence coldly, carefully, the economic analysis, as well as some of these environmental impacts, so that we get the right decision. And yes, we're seeing a further deferral, but that doesn't have an overall impact. We need to get that right choice.
You're clearer, Jim, aren't you? You always supported it in the past, and you still back it now?
Yeah, indeed, we had a 2003 white paper which recommended it. I was the aviation minister in 2008 when the consultation. Government opposed it in the 2010 general election, realised they'd made a mistake by 2012, set up a Davis Commission, said there'd be an answer by 2015, then there'd be an answer after the election, then there'd be an answer by January. Now it's the summer.
And then your mayor, Sadiq Khan, decided he didn't back it after all, and it was Labour confusion as well.
Given the Brexit result, one of the real challenges is connectivity to the rest of the world, and our trading partners, Paris, Madrid, Berlin, all of our major competitors have 4 or 6 runway airports. Dubai's just built a 6 runway airport. Istanbul, who suffered the tragedy last week, has just built a 6 runway airport. We are dithering and we need this sorted. And it's private sector investment. Heathrow and Gatwick, it's not taxpayers' money. Let both airports go on and do the job, which is to sell their business to their customers.
OK, well, you've heard him loud and clear there, James. You'll be reporting that back, I hope, to Theresa May.
Well, it's for the government now to make that decision.
Got to go. All over. Thanks very much.
I've been getting away